My Lords, I'm very grateful to my noble friend Baroness Neville-Rolfe for introducing the debate, and I'm acutely conscious of the expertise and experience that others have brought to bear. I'd like to begin with a point raised by the noble Lord Patel and the noble Lady Baroness Wheatcroft about the difficulty of measuring productivity, which of course is absolutely true. But as a rough guide, as a ballpark figure, I looked at what the OBR had to say. They produced a report in 2022 which found that in the private sector, productivity was back to 1.6% above where it had been on the eve of the pandemic. But in the public sector, it was still down by 7.4%. If we carry on losing productivity in the public sector at this rate, we will have suffered a further 20% decline within a decade, which the Centre for Economic and Business Research says would be the equivalent of £73 billion a year of extra spending. Now just think for a second about that. £73 billion a year. Think of the rows we have in this chamber about the relatively trivial sums involved in the winter fuel payments or VAT on school fees. £73 billion a year. Now why is that happening? I mean, there are structural reasons why there is greater productivity when there's a profit motive. I think we all accept that. But why is the gap widening? What's changed recently? Well, I think my noble friend Lord Patten was exactly on the button. Shortly, about a year after the pandemic, when everything was supposed to have got back to normal, when my right honourable friend Jacob Rees-Mogg was the minister, he was presented with a fait accompli by his officials. They said he absolutely had to sign the lease on a government agency or an arm's-length agency in central London. And he said, why do they need to be in this expensive place? Oh, it's absolutely vital, Minister. He said, well, it's actually walking distance from here. Let's go and have a look. And, of course, he found that there was nobody there. And hence the campaign he began of dropping off his, I thought, rather polite calling card saying, sorry you weren't at work, which, of course, created a furious backlash from the civil service trade unions. But there are jobs that require you to be there. Now, I, like the noble Lady Baroness Wheatcroft, I used to work in newspapers. In fact, for a while, I worked for the noble lady. And I'm sure she'll agree with me that there were jobs even then, long before the pandemic, that obviously could have been done from home, right? So if you're doing the Sudoku, or you're writing the pets column, or something, there's absolutely no reason for you to come into the office. And it struck me even 20 years ago as slightly wasteful that people were doing that. But equally, there were an awful lot of jobs, particularly the editorial jobs, where you really had to be there talking to people. Now, how many of the civil servants absent from their desks are in that second category? I think rather a lot. And I think we can all see the impact on productivity. I was certainly struck by it when I walked around the cavernous, echoing and rather beautiful corridors of the old Admiralty building when I was involved with the Department of Trade. It's extraordinary how immediately the impact is felt of people just not being there for meetings, people not talking about things, not sparking ideas off each other in the fallow times. And the point I really want to make, and I'll make it very briefly in deference to the noble lady the minister's throat, the point I really want to make is that this is a choice. Right? There are problems that the government can't avoid, like the ageing population, the changing ratio of workers to pensioners. But this is a choice. You can give large pay rises to public sector workers, but you are then left with less money to grow the rest of the economy. What I think you can't do is keep giving these pay rises at the same time as increasing their numbers. There were two very large increases in the civil service that both had a temporary and contingent cause. One was the repatriation of powers after Brexit, which required people to do them at home because they were no longer being done in Brussels. The other was the pandemic, which required more people to be brought in for testing and for vaccination and so on. Both of those bumps are now in the rearview mirror. Under the plans of the previous government, numbers were supposed to fall back towards where they had been, and there was a scheduled loss of 66,000 personnel, and that was quietly reversed, almost the first thing that the new government did. There was a time, my lords, when the arguments were about economics, about taking from the haves to give to the have-nots. What we can't have is simply an argument about taking from the private sector to give to the public. Private sector workers already have worse pension deals, they are already required to be in the office more, and they already work longer hours. We cannot keep squeezing the revenue-generating bit of the economy to fund increases in the revenue-consuming bit.